Hi, I'm Daniel Watkins, and this is my second video in my crash course to historical study for my upper level students. In this video, we're going to talk about secondary sources, what they are, and how to read them. Let's get started. First, I have to give a shout out to Professor Dana Agman at Virginia Tech. She's a colleague of mine and the person who came up with the mnemonic device that I'm going to use a little bit later to teach you how to analyze secondary sources. So I'm really thankful for Professor Agman allowing me to share this. Okay, let's start with a basic question. What is a secondary source? Well, briefly, a secondary source is any kind of piece of historical scholarship written after the time that the piece is studying and built on the analysis of primary sources. There are lots of different types of secondary sources. The main ones that we're going to deal with in our classes are books or monographs, books written by one author, journal articles, and essays. Essays are just like journal articles, except they are published in edited volumes, books, instead of serial productions like journals. Secondary sources are written by historians. They are interpretations of the past based on the analysis of primary sources. And because people tend to read primary sources differently, or people tend to find different types of primary sources, secondary sources often don't agree. These interpretations aren't always the same. And so to understand how to read secondary sources, we have to understand first that secondary sources come from particular perspectives, adopt particular methodologies, and come to different conclusions. So the model that Professor Agman came up with was to adopt a mnemonic device to help you pay attention to the most important things that you need to identify in a secondary source. The mnemonic device is Thomas. T-H-O-M-A-S. These represent different parts of an article, essay, or book that you need to identify when you read it. Let's start with T. T stands for topic. What is the topic of the source? This just means, what is it about? Another way of kind of thinking about how to identify the topic is to ask yourself the basic questions of the book. Who is the book about? What is the book about? When is the book about? Where is the book about? If you can answer those questions, then you have properly identified the book's topic. H is for historiography, and this is a little bit more challenging. If you've already taken the course historiography, then you probably are pretty familiar with this concept. But historiography is essentially the conversation that historians are having about a certain topic. So identifying the historiography in a piece is about identifying the secondary sources that the author is referencing, usually in the footnotes or in introductory or concluding sections. That will establish what the historiographical debate is that that person wants to try to make an intervention in with that article, essay, or book. O is for organization, and this is pretty basic, right? You just want to know how a piece is organized to know how the argument is being established. Usually there are two types of organizations in secondary sources. Most historical secondary sources are either organized chronologically, starting at a certain point in time and showing change over time, or thematically, taking on different topics in different sections. M is for methodology, and this is about how the author approaches the subject. Here is where you pay attention to the types of primary sources that the author is using to build her or his case. So listing the types of primary sources here, not every single primary source, but the types of primary sources. Does the author use primarily letters or newspaper articles? Does the author use tax registrars or pieces of legislation, right? These are the kinds of things you want to pay attention to and take note of. The other part of methodology is what type of history is this? And that's another way of getting at kind of the subdiscipline or the methodological discipline that the author is coming from. Is it a work of social history or political history or cultural history or gender history, right? This will help you understand the perspective that the author is taking. A is for argument, and this is the big one, right? You need to identify what the argument of the piece is. And that includes not only identifying what the thesis is, the main sort of central thesis of the piece, but also the main reasons of the piece. And reasons are essentially the points that back up the thesis, right? The points that are developed that back up the central thesis to the piece. You want to make sure that you get the shape of the argument when you read a piece. Finally, S is for significance. What this means essentially is, what does the piece contribute to the historiographical debate that it's supposed to intervene in, right? So if you identify what the historiographical debate is in the article, say, right? Significance is understanding what that article does to that debate. Does it revise someone else's opinion? Does it bring in some new perspective? Does it introduce a new methodology? Does it try something completely different and shift the conversation in a different direction, right? Significance is about asking, how is this piece new? Or how does this piece add something to a pre-existing debate? It's challenging to read in this way. This isn't like just picking up a novel, starting at the beginning, and enjoying it as you go through. It's more like dissecting a frog. It's about identifying the various parts and how they operate. And that's essentially what I'm going to be asking you to do when you read books and articles and essays in my class. I want you not only just to pay attention to the things you can find interesting, but also to identify these important elements, right? The elements of Thomas. If you can do that, then you've really understood the piece well and what its significance and purpose is in class. To help you out, I've put together a Thomas worksheet that I made available on the Canvas site. Just look in the More Resources page and you'll find it there. On the Thomas worksheet, I've divided up the little mnemonic into different boxes, and you can use it as an electronic document. Anytime you read a book or an article, you can just read through, and anytime you find, say, the topic, or you figure out something about the methodology, you just type it into the worksheet, and then you can save the worksheet and bring that to class. It will help you immensely when we have our discussions about the various books, articles, and essays that we're going to read. All right, that's it for this lesson. It's quick, but it's also kind of a little challenging. So if you have trouble doing this, if you have trouble analyzing secondary sources in this way, just come talk to me. Email me or come to my student hours and I will help you out. It takes a little practice, but once you get used to it, it's a really powerful way to read academic scholarship. Good luck. See you in class.